In medieval Irish and Scottish legend can be found a figure who goes by the name of Scotta or Scottia. Scottia was said to be the daughter of a pharaoh of Egypt, who would go on to marry a man named Nell, who in turn was said to be the son of a legendary Scythian king named Fenius. The legend goes on to say that Nell and Scottia would have a son named Goídel Glas, who would go on to become the eponymous ancestor of the Gaels. Some accounts, such as John of Forden's Chronicle of the Scottish Nation, names Gael Gaethelos and writes that he was the son of a Greek ruler. The Book of the Taking of Ireland is the main source we find mention of Scottia. The text, written in Middle Irish, a language used between circa 900 and 1200 AD, is described as a collection of poems and other writings of an earlier date that were fitted into an elaborate framework by a single author, with composition drawn from earlier, no longer extant sources, as well as the scholar's own additional paraphrases, which enlarge the verse. According to author Daithí O'Hogan, the text was still apparently accepted as conventional history by poets and scholars down until the 19th century. In the redaction of the tale which we find in the Book of Leinster, we learn that Gael's ancestors inhabited the land described as, quote, the northern side of Asia, namely Asia Minor, end quote. The text continues to tell us that Fenius was the son of Bath, who is said to be the progenitor of the Gaels, who were described as a people of Scythia. Fenius is described as travelling to Babylon to help construct the Tower of Babel, where he is said to have learned what is called the people's speech, which he then brought from Babylon before founding a great school which was dedicated to teaching the multiplicity of languages. Quote, Bath, of him are the Gaels and the people of Scythia. He had a son, the noble eminent man, whose name was Fenius. This is that Fenius who brought the people's speech from the tower, and it is he who had the great school, learning the multiplicity of languages. End quote. Fenius is described as having two sons, Nenwal and Nell. The former he left holding the princedom of Scythia when he left to teach at the school, while Nell is described as being born and raised at the school, becoming a master of languages. From there, Nell is approached by the Pharaoh of Egypt, who asks him to travel there so that he may teach the art of language to them. Fenius later leaves Asia, where he is said to have gone to help construct the tower, returning to Scythia, where after 40 years upon his death, he passes the chieftainship to his son, Nenwal. Quote, Now Fenius had two sons, Nenwal, one of the two, whom he left in the princedom of Scythia behind him, and Nell the other son, at the tower was he born. Nell was a master of all the languages, wherefore one came to summon him from Pharaoh, in order to learn the multiplicity of languages from him. But Fenius came out of Asia to Scythia, whence he had gone for the building of the tower, so that he died in the princedom of Scythia at the end of 40 years, and passed on the chieftainship to his son, Nenwal. End quote. The O'Clery redaction elaborates on this further, saying that when Nell travelled to Egypt at the request of Pharaoh, he was rewarded with the hand of Scottia, as well as being given land and a heritage. Quote, And after being a while in Egypt, the Pharaoh, that is the king of Egypt, gave him his daughter Scottia to wife, besides a heritage and land. End quote. From here we are told Goídel Glas was born from Nell and Scottia, and that Gael would go on to create the Gaelic language. Quote, Now that is the time when Goídel Glas, from whom are the Gaels, was born, of Scottia, daughter of Pharaoh. From her are the Scots named. Feni are named from Fenius, a meaning without secretiveness. Gaedel from comely Goídel Glas, Scots from Scottia. It is Gael Glass who fashioned the Gaelic language out of the 72 languages." End quote. The passage then goes on to list 72 languages from which Gael is described as cutting the Gaelic language. Quote, "That is the tally of languages without tarnish out of which Gael cut Gaelic. Known to me as their role of understanding, the groups, the manifold languages." End quote. In the O'Clery redaction of the story, we are also told that Gael was a contemporary of Moses, and it is said that when he was a young boy, he was bitten by a venomous snake, which brings him close to death. The text goes on to say that Moses cures him of the venom and bestows upon him protection from future bites. This passage explains how Gael got his second name, glass, which is a word used to describe a grey or blue colour. Quote, "Now that Gael, whom we have mentioned, was a little boy at the time, and it happened that a venomous serpent wound itself round him, so that death was near him. His people said to Nell that he should carry the boy to Moses, and so it was done. Moses made vehement and diligent prayer, and when the boy reached him, he struck the famous rod on the serpent till he cleft it in two. The boy was sound at once, but there was a green ring on him in the place where the serpent had coiled about him, so that thus Glass stuck to him as an extra name. Moses left virtues and blessings on the boy Gael, so that no venomous serpent should ever do mischief from that out to him or to any of his seed forever." End quote. Gael is described as eventually becoming ruler over a region of Egypt, before passing the rulership to his son and then his grandson. Quote, "Gael Glass, son of Nell, took the rule and strong headship of the aforesaid estate after his father's death. A son was born afterwards to Gael in Egypt. Iasru was he. He was nourished till he could bear arms, and he took the same principality after his father's death. That Iasru had a princely son, and Sru was his name. He excelled the warriors of his time in valour and heroism. Iasru died after a season, and his son takes the principality after." End quote. Eventually, after a power change in Egypt, we are told the descendants of Gael were forced to flee, returning to their ancestral homeland of Scythia, taking Scottia with them. The text goes on to say that Scottia dies shortly after making the journey. Quote, "After that Pharaoh Tures took the rule of Egypt, and when he obtained strength and power, and when his warriors became numerous, he remembered their hostility and unfriendliness against the seed of Nell, son of Fenius. There grew up thence frays and contentions between them on both sides, so that the men of Egypt drove Sru and his son, Eber Scott, with the whole of their people out of Egypt. They advance, accordingly, on the sea to their native fatherland. Scottia, the daughter of Pharaoh, mother of Goídel Glas, was with them in her old age. After their landing in that country, Scottia, the daughter of Pharaoh, died among them." End quote. From here, the text says there is a successional dispute between the descendants of the two sons of Fenius, which ultimately results in the expulsion of the descendants of Gael, who eventually end up settling in Spain. Quote, "4 ships' companies strong went Sru out of Egypt. There were 24 wedded couples and 3 hirelings for every ship. Sru and his son, Eber Scott, they were the chieftains of the expedition. It is then that Nell, son of Fenius, prince of Scythia, died, and Sru also died immediately after reaching Scythia. Eber Scott took by force the kingship of Scythia from the progeny of Nell, till he fell at the hands of Noemius, son of Nell. Thereafter, there was a contention for the princedom, and for that reason was the seed of Gael driven forth upon the sea, so that they were 7 years on the sea, skirting the world on the north side, along the Taurian Sea to Crete and to Sicily. They reached Spain thereafter, and Spain they took by force." End quote. We also find a similar story echoed in the Historia Brittonum, or the History of the Britons, a text commonly attributed to Nennius and thought to have been originally written around 828 AD. The story goes as follows. Quote, "According to the most learned among the Scots, if anyone desires to learn what I am now going to state, Ireland was a desert and uninhabited when the children of Israel crossed the Red Sea, in which, as we read in the Book of the Law, the Egyptians who followed them were drowned. At that period there lived among these people, with a numerous family, a Scythian of noble birth, who had been banished from his country and did not go to pursue the people of God. The Egyptians who were left, seeing the destruction of the great men of their nation, and fearing lest he should possess himself of their territory, took counsel together and expelled him. Thus reduced, he wandered 42 years in Africa and arrived with his family at the altars of the Philistines by the lake of Osiers. Then passing between Rusicada and the hilly country of Syria, they travelled by the river Malva through Mauritania as far as the Pillars of Hercules, and crossing the Tyrrhenian Sea, landed in Spain, where they continued many years, having greatly increased and multiplied. Thence, 1002 years after the Egyptians were lost in the Red Sea, they passed into Ireland and the district of Dalriada." End quote.